All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, how many times have you heard Democrats in the Trump era bemoan the undermining of democracy? Now, sometimes those concerns were truly legitimate, like the way that his hotel in D.C. functions as a pay-to-play scheme for foreigners who want to get on his good side. Sometimes they were less legitimate, like the complete meltdown over Russian-bought buff birding memes on Facebook. But over the past few years, the deeply held concern for our sacred democracy was oft expressed in cable news segment after cable news segment. I myself really once thought that it was only primarily those bad Republicans who were trying to undermine our democracy. Now, there was certainly plenty of bad behavior to be legitimately outraged about. The racial gerrymandering attempts and blatant attempts at suppressing the vote among the young, minorities, and the working class is a tactic I have nothing but absolute contempt for. But boy, has the Democratic Party establishment exposed just how shallow their actual commitment to democracy is in the very early days of this primary. So, first, of course, came Iowa. Think about this. For all their moaning about election integrity and the sanctity of the vote, the DNC and the Iowa Democratic Party dispatched with any notions of fairness, impartiality, or even basic common sense in selecting an election app provider that was so cozy with Pete that his signs were apparently plastered all over their office. When greed and clubbiness conflicted with the appearance and the reality of free and fair elections, we all know what they chose, and without any hesitation. Then, of course, after having loudly declared for years that the person who gets the most votes should be the winner of electoral contests, they all went ahead and let Pete declare himself victorious based on an archaic state delegate equivalent calculation that every major news outlet, by the way, found to be completely incorrect. Apparently, the winner of the popular vote should win, unless that candidate happens to be inconvenient for them. Then, of course, came Bloomberg. Folks might be having a few second thoughts about him now, but a whole lot of establishment Democrats, even some who've had the audacity to call themselves progressives, stand ready, willing, and able to sell their soul and their democracy all the way out to grab their own billionaire strongman. They didn't blink at the way his money purchased endorsements, or how owning your own massive media company could be a gigantic conflict of interest, or how his donations quashed critical analysis from supposedly progressive think tanks. All their rhetoric about money undermining democracy went right out the window once they had their own billionaire to buy the election and keep their own paychecks flowing. And now, new reporting in Politico indicates Bloomberg is actively working a strategy to win over superdelegates so that he can steal the nomination from Bernie on the second ballot. Just your resident oligarch, pressuring party elites, many of whom have financially benefited from his largesse, into subverting the will of the people. Nothing to see here, folks. And of course, speaking of that incredibly undemocratic maneuver, this week we watched as every Democratic candidate not named Bernie Sanders backed a process that would allow elites to completely overturn the results of all these elections that we're covering, and that many of you are volunteering in and giving money to and certainly voting in. A process that would render all of those contests and the concept of democracy itself a complete joke. Let's just watch them all casually embrace Banana Republic style democracy once again for posterity.
We are less than 2 weeks away from a national primary. And I want to ask all of you this simple question. There's a very good chance none of you are going to have enough delegates to the Democratic National Convention to clinch this nomination. Okay? If that happens, I want all of your opinions on this. Should the person with the most delegates at the end of this primary season be the nominee, even if they are short of a majority? Senator Sanders, I'm going to let you go last here because I know your view on this. So instead, I will start with you, Mayor Bloomberg.
Whatever the rules of the Democratic Party are, they should be followed. And if they have a process, which I believe they do,
I'm trying to do
so
this
that
yes or no
everybody
to make it
else,
fast.
everybody can.
So you want the convention to work its will?
Yes.
Senator Warren.
But a convention working its will means that people have the delegates that are pledged to them, and they keep those delegates until you come to the convention. All of the people.
All righty. Vice President Biden?
Play by the rules.
Yes or no? Leading person with the delegates, should they be the nominee or not?
No, let the process work its way out.
Mayor Buttigieg?
Not necessarily. Not to listen.
Senator Klobuchar?
Let the process work.
Senator Sanders?
Well, the process includes 500 superdelegates on the second ballot. So I think that the will of the people should prevail. Yes.
Thank you, guys.
The most votes should become the nominee.
5 no's and a yes.
Person who has the most votes should be the nominee. Seems pretty simple to me, guys. Now, the most charitable interpretation of this hasty abandonment of democracy is that Trump has so freaked people out that they're willing to completely dispense with all their principles in order just to get him out of office. Now, for some Democratic voters who've bought into certain electability myths and believe that they must back the most right-wing person possible in order to win, I think that may well be the case. That's why Bloomberg, a completely cynical choice with many odious policy preferences that go right along with his own odious personal behavior, has held appeal. But for party elites, it is something else entirely. The truth is, when I was right there with them talking about the scourge of Republican voter suppression tactics, they didn't really care about democracy or the will of the people being heard. They cared about power. And if the shoe had been on the other foot, if Democrats were the ones who would have benefited from having the young or the vulnerable disenfranchised, they'd be pushing voter IDs and closing polling places just as hard as they're pushing for superdelegates now. Never forget that as soon as Bernie Sanders started winning diverse working class and immigrant communities in satellite caucuses in Iowa, the DNC, in concert with Pete, jumped right in there to cry foul and to try to diminish the impact of those voters, behavior that would have elicited howls of rage and hours of coverage if that had been done by Republicans. Their commitment to maintaining their own grift and hold on power is absolute, but you do not need to buy it. Part of populism is actually believing in and putting your faith in the people of this country, not in gerrymandering or voter suppression or superdelegates or oligarchs, all their scare tactics about how listening to the will of the people will lead to devastation and 4 more years of Donald Trump are really just that, scare tactics. They're all ultimately designed for you to be bullied into handing power back to them so that they can save the poor, dumb voters from themselves. Well, we see through their ploy, and if they try to play these games, there will be hell to pay. Sagar, part of why this does make me so angry is because I bought it. When I was at MSNBC and we're covering voter ID, we're covering voter suppression, things that I still care deeply about, I really bought into the idea that it was, the Democrats were on the right side of this and the Republicans were on the wrong side, when really it was all just political convenience, and that has been thoroughly exposed at this point.
Turns out that they're both on the same side, and that's on keeping their grift going. Right? That's actually what the entire game is about, and that's what this superdelegates thing is so crazy. And you rightfully point out that the only person who was on that stage who was consistent was actually Bernie. Because, look, I've been critical of all this stuff on the popular vote and the Electoral College, but the rest of them went out there, and I'm going to talk about this, went out there forever being like, oh, the popular vote, whoever wins the most wins is supposed to the most votes is the one who should win the election. And now they don't believe in that because they're willing to use, the super delegates and the convention and all these arcane processes just so they can be the nominee, because they care more about that than they do actually advancing some of their own, what they say are their own goals for everybody else. And that's it. It's a naked power grab for everybody to see. Just be honest about it. In a way, I respect Bloomberg for just coming in and trying to buy the election, while the rest of them have been out there talking about, to higher ideals like Pete Buttigieg and all these others. No. You just want power. Just say it.
Yep.
At least that's more honest.
Yep, absolutely right. I mean, we see Elizabeth Warren, her vaunted principles. And I know you're going to cover that in your radar, but how quickly those folded the moment it was inconvenient for her. And she's, now, after having decried the influence of super PACs, suddenly she's decided that maybe now that she's cash trapped, she should take that super PAC money. Surprise, surprise. And Democrats have long been so hypocritical on money in politics. It's part of why people have no trust in them, why they have no moral high ground when they try to prosecute any sort of anti-corruption message against Trump, because they've been crying about money in politics for so long, and yet what do?
Take it.
They do the same thing as the Republicans. They take whatever cash they can get from wherever they can get it in whatever denominations, no matter how odious the interest, no matter how much it undermines the principles they claim to care about. They take it because ultimately getting themselves reelected is more important than any of the values that they claim to stand for.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's just a complete revolving door.
All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.